ನಮಸ್ಕಾರ. ಇವತ್ತು ಸಾಂಸ್ಕ್ರಿಟಿಕ್ ಸ್ಟಡೀಸ್ ಇನ್ ದಿ ವೆಸ್ಟ್ ಈ ವಿಷಯದ ಬಗ್ಗೆ ಉಪನ್ಯಾಸ ಮಾಡೋದಕ್ಕೆ ಡಾಕ್ಟರ್ ನವರತ್ನ ಎಸ್ ರಾಜಾರಾಮ್ ಆಗಮಿಸಿದ್ದಾರೆ. ಮೂಲತಃ ಗಣಿತಶಾಸ್ತ್ರಜ್ಞರು, ಇತಿಹಾಸ ಸಂಶೋಧಕರು. 20 ವರ್ಷಗಳಿಗೂ ಹೆಚ್ಚು ಕಾಲ ಅಮೆರಿಕದ ವಿವಿಧ ವಿಶ್ವವಿದ್ಯಾಲಯಗಳಲ್ಲಿ ಬೋಧಕರು, ಸಂಶೋಧಕರು ಆಗಿದ್ದರು. ಹೂಸ್ಟನ್ ವಿಶ್ವವಿದ್ಯಾಲಯದ ಕಂಟಿನ್ಯೂಯಿಂಗ್ ಇಂಜಿನಿಯರಿಂಗ್ ಎಜುಕೇಷನ್ ವಿಭಾಗದ ನಿರ್ದೇಶಕರಾಗಿದ್ದರು. ಪ್ರಸಿದ್ಧ ಲಾಕ್ಹೀಡ್ ಕಾರ್ಪೊರೇಷನ್ನಲ್ಲಿ ಪ್ರಿನ್ಸಿಪಲ್ ಸೈಂಟಿಸ್ಟ್ ಆಗಿ ಹೊಣೆ ನಿರ್ವಹಿಸಿದರು. 1984ರಿಂದ 5-6 ವರ್ಷ ಅಮೆರಿಕದ ಬಾಹ್ಯಾಕಾಶ ವಿಜ್ಞಾನ ಸಂಸ್ಥೆ ನಾಸಾ, ನ್ಯಾಷನಲ್ ಏರೋನಾಟಿಕಲ್ ಆ್ಯಂಡ್ ಸ್ಪೇಸ್ ಅಡ್ಮಿನಿಸ್ಟ್ರೇಷನ್, ಆ ವೈಜ್ಞಾನಿಕ ಸಂಸ್ಥೆಗೆ ಸಲಹೆಗಾರರಾಗಿದ್ದರು. ಅದಕ್ಕೂ ಹಿಂದೆ IBM, ಜನರಲ್ ಮೋಟಾರ್ಸ್ ಮೊದಲಾದ ಸಂಸ್ಥೆಗಳಿಗೂ ಸಲಹೆಗಾರರಾಗಿದ್ದರು. ಕಳೆದ 20 ವರ್ಷಗಳಿಂದ ವೇದಕಾಲೀನ ಭಾರತದ ಬಗ್ಗೆ ಹಾಗೂ ಭಾರತದ ಗಣಿತಶಾಸ್ತ್ರ ಪರಂಪರೆಯ ಬಗ್ಗೆ ಸಂಶೋಧನೆ ನಡೆಸಿದ್ದಾರೆ. ಸಮಸಾಮಯಿಕ ವಿಷಯಗಳ ಬಗ್ಗೆ ಅವರ ಅಂಕಣ ಬರಹಗಳು ಪ್ರಮುಖ ಇಂಗ್ಲೀಷ್ ಹಾಗೂ ಕನ್ನಡ ಪತ್ರಿಕೆಗಳಲ್ಲಿ ಪ್ರಕಟವಾಗಿವೆ. ಸಂಯುಕ್ತ ಕರ್ನಾಟಕದಲ್ಲಿಯೂ ನಿಯತವಾಗಿ ಅವರ ಅಂಕಣ ಬರಹಗಳು ಪ್ರಕಟ ಆಗ್ತಾ ಇವೆ. ಅವರ ಅನೇಕ ಗ್ರಂಥಗಳು ವಿಶಾಲ ಜನಾದರಣೆ ಪಡೆದಿವೆ. ಡೇವಿಡ್ ಫ್ರಾಲಿ ಅವರೊಡನೆ ಡಾಕ್ಟರ್ ರಾಜಾರಾಮ್ ಅವರು ಬರೆದ ವೇದಿಕ್ ಆರ್ಯನ್ಸ್ ಆ್ಯಂಡ್ ದಿ ಆರಿಜಿನ್ಸ್ ಆಫ್ ಸಿವಿಲೈಸೇಷನ್ ಇದೇ ಮೊದಲಾದ ಗ್ರಂಥಗಳು ಪ್ರಸಿದ್ಧವಾಗಿವೆ. ನಟ್ವರ್ ಝಾ ಅನ್ನುವ ಪ್ರಸಿದ್ಧ ವಿದ್ವಾಂಸರೊಡಗೂಡಿ 5000 ವರ್ಷ ಹಳೆಯ ಸಿಂಧೂ ಲಿಪಿಯನ್ನು ಭೇದಿಸುವ ಪ್ರಯತ್ನ ಇವರ ಡಿಸೈಫರ್ಡ್ ಇಂಡಸ್ ಸ್ಕ್ರಿಪ್ಟ್ ಗ್ರಂಥದಲ್ಲಿ ಮಾಡಿದ್ದಾರೆ. ಇವಲ್ಲದೆ ಇವರ ಆರ್ಯನ್ ಇನ್ವೇಷನ್ ಆಫ್ ಇಂಡಿಯಾ, ದ ಮಿತ್ ಆ್ಯಂಡ್ ದಿ ಟ್ರೂತ್, ದಿ ಪಾಲಿಟಿಕ್ಸ್ ಆಫ್ ಹಿಸ್ಟರಿ, ಆರ್ಯನ್ ಇನ್ವೇಷನ್ ಥಿಯರಿ ಆ್ಯಂಡ್ ದಿ ಸಬ್ವರ್ಷನ್ ಆಫ್ ಸ್ಕಾಲರ್ಶಿಪ್, ಸೆಕ್ಯುಲರಿಸಮ್, ದಿ ನ್ಯೂ ಮಾಸ್ಕ್ ಆಫ್ ಫಂಡಮೆಂಟಲಿಸಮ್ ಮೊದಲಾದ ಅನೇಕ ಕೃತಿಗಳು ಪ್ರಸಿದ್ಧವಾಗಿವೆ. ಅವರ ಇತ್ತೀಚಿನ ದಿ ಸರ್ಚ್ ಫಾರ್ ದಿ ಹಿಸ್ಟಾರಿಕಲ್ ಕೃಷ್ಣ ಅನ್ನುವ ಗ್ರಂಥನೂ ತುಂಬ ಜನಪ್ರಿಯವಾಗಿ ಹಲವು ಆವೃತ್ತಿಗಳಾಗಿವೆ. ಇವರ ಕನ್ನಡ ಶೋಧ ಬರಹಗಳ ಸಂಕಲನ ಇತಿಹಾಸ, ಸಂಸ್ಕೃತಿ ಮತ್ತು ರಾಷ್ಟ್ರೀಯತೆ ರಾಷ್ಟ್ರೋತ್ಥಾನ ಸಾಹಿತ್ಯ ಪ್ರಕಾಶನ ಸಂಸ್ಥೆಯಿಂದ ಪ್ರಕಟ ಆಗಿದೆ. ಪಾಪ್ಯುಲೇಷನ್ ಜೆನೆಟಿಕ್ಸ್ ವಿಜ್ಞಾನದ ಈಚಿನ ಶೋಧಗಳ ಪರಿಣಾಮವಾಗಿ ಭಾರತದ ಅತಿ ಪ್ರಾಚೀನ ಜನಸಮುದಾಯಗಳು ಸ್ಥಳೀಯ ಮೂಲದವೇ ಹೊರತು ಬೇರೆ ಎಲ್ಲಿಂದಲೋ ಬಂದವಲ್ಲ ಅಂತ ಸಿದ್ಧಪಡಿಸಿದ್ದಾರೆ. ಇದೀಗ ಅಮೆರಿಕದೊಳಗಿನ ಆಸಕ್ತ ವಿದ್ಯಾರ್ಥಿಗಳ ಹಾಗೂ ವಿಶ್ವವಿದ್ಯಾಲಯಗಳ ಅಪೇಕ್ಷೆಯಂತೆ ಅಮೆರಿಕದಲ್ಲಿ ಭಾರತೀಯ ಸಂಸ್ಕೃತಿಗೆ ಸಂಬಂಧಿಸಿದ ಪ್ರೌಢ ಸಂಶೋಧನಾ ವಿದ್ವತ್ ಕೇಂದ್ರವೊಂದನ್ನು ಬೋಸ್ಟನ್ ಹತ್ತಿರ ಸ್ಥಾಪಿಸುವ ಪ್ರಯತ್ನದಲ್ಲಿ ಇದ್ದಾರೆ ಡಾಕ್ಟರ್ ನವರತ್ನ ರಾಜಾರಾಮ್. ಸಾಂಸ್ಕ್ರಿಟಿಕ್ ಸ್ಟಡೀಸ್ ಇನ್ ದ ವೆಸ್ಟ್ ಅವರು ಇತ್ತೀಚೆಗಷ್ಟೇ ವಿದೇಶ ಪ್ರವಾಸ ಮಾಡಿ ಬಂದಿದ್ದಾರೆ. ಸೊ ವಿದೇಶಗಳಲ್ಲಿ ಸಂಸ್ಕೃತ ಅಧ್ಯಯನದ ಸ್ಥಿತಿಗತಿ ಈಗ ಹೇಗಿದೆ ಅನ್ನುವ ಬಗ್ಗೆ ತಮ್ಮ ಉಪನ್ಯಾಸವನ್ನು ಆರಂಭಿಸಬೇಕು ಅಂತ ಡಾಕ್ಟರ್ ನವರತ್ನ ರಾಜಾರಾಮ್ ಅವರನ್ನು ಪ್ರಾರ್ಥನೆ ಮಾಡ್ತೇನೆ.
ನಮಸ್ಕಾರ. ನಾನು ಮೈಸೂರಿನವನೇ, ಕನ್ನಡದಲ್ಲೇ ಬರೆದು ಕನ್ನಡ ಮೀಡಿಯಮ್ನಲ್ಲೇ ಓದಿದ್ದು. ಆದರೆ ಅನೌನ್ಸ್ ಮಾಡಿದ್ದು ಇಂಗ್ಲೀಷ್ದಲ್ಲಿ ಅಂತ ಸ್ವಲ್ಪ ಹೆಚ್ಚಾಗಿ ಇಂಗ್ಲೀಷ್ದಲ್ಲೇ. ಬೇಕಾದ್ರೆ ಕೊನೆಯಲ್ಲಿ ಸ್ವಲ್ಪ ಸಮಯ ಬಿಟ್ಟು ಆದಷ್ಟು ಪ್ರಶ್ನೋತ್ತರಗಳಿಗೆ ಅವಕಾಶ ಕೊಡೋಣ ಅಂತಿದೆ. ಹೆಚ್ಚು ಸ್ವಲ್ಪ ಕೀಪ್ ದಿಸ್ ಟಾಕ್ ಕ್ವೈಟ್ ಇನ್ಫಾರ್ಮಲ್. ಫಸ್ಟ್ ಐ ವುಡ್ ಲೈಕ್ ಟು ಬಿಗಿನ್ ವಿತ್ ದ ಸಿಚುವೇಶನ್ in India. Before that, I should say that I spent a semester. I have been in the US since 1970, and for about 22-23 years. After that, I came back here in 93 and have spent much of the time here itself although I have been going back and forth. But I spent one semester at the University of Massachusetts Center for Indic Studies, which was started by Dr. Balram Singh, who is an internationally known biophysical chemist. So I'm an adjunct faculty member there. I'm going there again and in October. And so having taught many times, I had given lectures and seminars, but it's quite a different thing to spend a semester teaching students, meeting every day, and also having to grade them, give exams, ask them to write term papers and all that. And so it puts me in a perspective of how the field is evolving. The two courses I taught were one language, which was a Hindi course, with a little bit of introduction to Sanskrit, not so much teaching as giving them an idea, but the Hindi course also had a cultural aspect. That means Hindi language, and the students took it seriously. Interestingly, all my students were Americans, except one Kerala girl who was a Kerala Christian who took the Hindi course. And my other course was called Origins of Civilization, which was based primarily on my work with Frawley and to a lesser extent on Jha, but the emphasis was on what Mr. Ramaswamy mentioned just now about the natural history aspect of it, that is population genetics and the climatic changes going back to the Ice Age. So it's rather important to keep this in mind, that what is happening in the Sanskritic studies, by which we mean everything related to Samskriti and not just Sanskrit language. That is why I think very properly Mr. Ramaswamy used the word Sanskritic studies rather than Sanskrit studies. Some of the things I have to say may be a little unpalatable to some people here, but the thing is, I have reached a certain age and situation where I don't have to always say things that please others, but sometimes it is good to know what the reality is. Interestingly, that is my latest area of interest, research also. That is the study of the problem of reality, which comes up in the puzzles thrown up by quantum mechanics. I may mention it here, that the first published scientific article I wrote was on quantum theory. It was a student article, but it was published when I was about 19 or so. And my master's thesis also was relating to quantum physics, which is what are known as function space integral or Feynman integrals, and related to that Wiener integrals and the partial differential equations. So after many years, the technical work I did in the United States was primarily in the area of probability theory, which is very close to quantum physics. So after many years now, I'm going back to quantum physics, not so much for the mathematical side, but the metaphysical side. And essentially, the Center for Indic Studies was established by Dr. Balram Singh, and I will have more to say about it. That seems to be the new trend. That is, just as we have Sanskritic studies that goes beyond the Sanskrit language and literature or history and anything, Indic studies also goes beyond India alone. So the approach we have taken is is to see the Indic civilization, especially the term Indic civilization is being used because we have used the word, others have used the word Greater India to include Cambodia, Indonesia, Malaysia, all those regions where the Indian influence is there. Because if you use the word Greater India, it may offend people because they don't like it. And also, I don't think it's quite correct, because India itself is it's a Greek word, and essentially we refer to the region from the Indus to the Mekong. So the political boundaries are temporary, but they form a single ecological zone dominated by two natural features, One, of course, is the monsoon climate, and the other are the Himalayan mountains. By Himalayan, I mean the entire chain from Hindu Kush all to the Himalayas going all the way to Cambodia. I mean so the great rivers from the Indus to the Mekong River. So the drastic climatic change that took place about 11,000 years ago when the Ice Age ended, that was our starting point for our course. And although others have talked about it, I believe with Frawley, I was the first to bring out that we must look to that and to study the origins of the Vedic civilization that is now generally accepted. And and another point that we made in our course, which we are increasingly going to emphasize, is the work with Jha. I held back the subsequent research that Jha and I had made because the climate was not appropriate. There was a whole lot of propaganda, shouting and screaming and all that. I didn't think it would get a fair hearing, but now we are comfortable. And also, Frawley and I, we are working on the second volume. Jha died about 4 years ago. Just before he died, he sent me, just after he died, his son sent me some of his later papers, work, which in my judgment is far more important than the Indus script. It doesn't tell us anything more, but that's beside the point. So we are going to be working on a book. Frawley and I are working on a book which will interpret the Harappan civilization in the context of which the script happens to be a very small part. We were excited when we first got it, but now it turns out that we know a great deal more. And this thing, I mentioned this because of Parpola's recent antics in the Tamil Nadu thing, the Tamil as a classical language and all sorts of things. So Parpola came here, he praised the Dravidians who never existed 5,000 years ago for having done, for built Harappa, Mohenjo-daro and all that. We can take that a step further and say that the Punjabis came and built Rameshwaram, Mahabalipuram and all those things, and then they were driven north. We have about the same amount of evidence. So that Sardarjis wrote the Sangam literature. And see, the fact of the matter is, this has seriously compromised academic integrity. And in the bargain, he was paid 10 lakhs, which is about $25,000. Well, it's not too bad, but the fact of the matter is, it does two things. One, I'm writing an article for Deccan Herald on this. This is called ideological misuse. You see, in the 19th century, now it is exposed that the British promoted the Aryan myth for their own interests. Now these people are promoting the Dravidian myth. There, Max Muller was paid by the British. Parpola is being paid by this thing. So where are the scholars? What? And also look at the danger of this. Would any scholar today question this Dravidian myth in Tamil Nadu? Even here, and I don't find any outrage. I mean, I was happy to see Deccan Herald write an editorial pointing out, but not with sufficient focus. So this kind of ideological abuse of scholarship means the destruction, at least seriously undermining of the academic freedom. And none other than Mahadevan, Airavata Mahadevan, who was sort of a camp follower of these people, was, when I asked him, you're a scholar, you know the truth. He said, look, in order to survive in Tamil Nadu, we have to do these things. So, is it any wonder that the important work, even relating to Vedanta and all that, gets done in the United States and not here? I had students writing term papers in my second, civilizations course. Academic freedom was taken for granted. One of the students wanted to write about the St. Thomas myth. He wrote a very good paper, term paper. He disagreed with me. I felt that the St. Thomas was not a historical figure at all. He came later. He took a middle position. He believed that St. Thomas was a historical figure, that he had come to Afghanistan and all that, but his having founded the mission of St. Thomas in Kerala has no basis. He didn't go as far as I did, but in any event, he disagreed with me. So it's not merely a question of, students there writing whatever they want. They are not even concerned about disagreeing with the teacher or professor or anything. Would anybody doing a PhD in Tamil Nadu forget about it? This was an undergraduate term paper. So this raises a fundamental question. Our students are not inferior. In fact, because we are more selective, they may be better than the average college student in the United States, but they do better work there. Why is it happening? Academic freedom is a very major reason. If I always have to look over the shoulder to see Karunanidhi or his 20 children or somebody will be looking over it, and I have to please all those people, where are you going to get quality work? So, and a year ago, you may remember, Michael Witzel came here and then went around. And you see, he spent most of his time in South India because essentially he was trying to peddle his Aryan theory, and he failed. But Parpola learned from that experience perhaps and peddled his Dravidian theory, and he was paid for it. Okay? And Witzel came to my talk. I had a few exchanges with him. You will see that. So this raises a particular question. Why are these people coming to India? I mean, talking to our people and all that kind of thing. The reason is very simple. Sanskritic studies, or what we formerly called Indology, the term is going out of favor now, has collapsed. I mean, it's gone into steep decline in the West. The Cambridge University has closed its Sanskrit department. Cambridge University in England. I was at Cambridge, Massachusetts, where you have Harvard and MIT, and my talks were at that place, has closed its Sanskrit department. No students. And a university, the Berlin Center for Indology, which was founded in 1821, has closed down. They have closed it. Harvard University, the Sanskrit department, is maintaining a precarious existence, but it is now part of the theology. I mean, they don't call it theology, they call it the divinity school. And I have good friends there. Francis Clooney, I mean, we should not judge everyone by a few bad apples. And he knows Vedanta. He gave a very, at the Center for Indic Studies, there is an annual Patanjali lecture. The last one was delivered by every fall, that is in the October or November or something. The last one, that is 2009 November, it was given by Francis Clooney, who is a theologian with the Divinity School. He's an ordained Catholic priest. And also, please do not judge those Catholic priests and those people from the missionaries you see here. Many of them are very thorough scholars. I mean, if he's an ordained priest, he has to hold certain opinions. But the fact of the matter is there is more. You can discuss with them, debate with them. I had a discussion with them, and about an article I wrote which appeared in Eternal India. That's the one that's coming out of Delhi. So what is happening is the decline of in Sanskrit and these studies in the West is very important, because those people, when they come here, get royal treatment here. If Parpola had come to where I was there, University of Massachusetts or Cambridge, Mass, or he said the same thing, in the first place he would not be allowed, because that is now considered discredited. And second, he would have been ridiculed. I mean, in fact, Witzel, right there at Cambridge, Mass, when he came to my talk, he was sort of almost shouted down, although I had to tell people, look, let him say what he wants. Don't, these people have been disgraced. I mean, he has tenure, there is nothing you can do. So they have to suffer him. So, and the fact is, he's a professor of Sanskrit, he doesn't have a single Indian student. The two students who were there, you will see in the video, happen to be Eastern Europeans who were happy to be in the United States. Just as many of us people go there, on junkets. So they get free tuition and all that. And those people cannot really do any Sanskrit. Still, I hear arguments here in India, and people who should know better, that India should somehow support Sanskrit departments in the West. Do they support English departments here? The thing is, so for the survival, that's what they're saying. For the survival of Sanskrit. Edwin Bryant, who is a Hare Krishna Swami, but he's also a professor at Rutgers. That alone should be sufficient to discredit that department. He's saying, look, we are all having financial difficulties. So for our Sanskrit programs, India should support it. My point is, let them die a natural death. Sanskrit will not. It was there before Indology, long before that. Kalidasa, there may be controversy about his date, but there is no controversy about the fact that he was there long before Indology appeared on the scene. Okay, so if Pali disappeared from India, it was for social and political reasons in India. It was not because Pali should be studied. That's a different matter as antiquarian. But that's not the situation with Sanskrit. Because what has happened with the Sanskrit language and literature, and the same thing is going to happen now with other aspects of Indic studies or Sanskritic studies, is that there are new institutions coming up, like the Center for Indic Studies at University of Massachusetts, and I know a few others, who are not building on something that was built by colonial scholars like Max Muller or Witzel. These are holdovers from the old era, but being built from the ground up by people who are knowledgeable, both Indians and Americans. And another thing we must understand is the younger generation of Indians, of people of Indian origin there, in the United States, are Americans. They have some attachment to India, which is more cultural, but it is definitely not, they don't see themselves as Indians. They are Americans. They were born and brought up there, they come here and all that. Just as you have German Americans and those kinds of people. So if we are going to reach out to them, it will be the same way that we reach out to the youth here. Youth here, we must make it relevant to the present generation. We can't expect them to go back. That is one of the main messages. For example, last Sunday, I was at the Ayodhya program. And what struck me when I meet young people is, in their 20s, they were 3-4 years old when the Babri Masjid was demolished. Now there is no Babri Masjid. So they cannot relate to what to us was very important. So we must bring it to our time, to make it relevant to them. So we have to bring out a message and explain it to them in a language that they understand. Okay, I think that is my main message. That what is happening in the United States, typically I have found the same ideas filter down here a few years later. For whatever reason, whether it is right or wrong or anything. And so, coming back to that, right now, the Indology or Indic studies or Sanskrit department, not Sanskrit studies. I'm very glad that you used the term Sanskritic. So Sanskritic studies is replacing what we call, just the Sanskrit departments. So, and but these departments are suffering, but you find that the study of Sanskrit is growing. And one of my lectures was organized by the MIT branch of Samskrita Bharati. Samskrita Bharati, the introduction was in Sanskrit and all that. So there are people, and most of them were born in the United States, of Indian origin, some are Americans also. And as I told you, all my Hindi students were Americans, except one, all my origins of civilization students were were Americans. And so we must understand that the baggage that we carry here means nothing to them. For example, as soon as I presented the evidence and all that about the Aryan myth, one of the students wrote a term on that, the Aryan myth, and she looked at how it was misused in Germany and all that. She was a somewhat older person, a married woman. So this, from their point of view, And the point of view, it's a generational problem. Please understand, it is not a nationality issue. They look at the evidence and then say the whole thing is absurd. So what we need to do is to look at the historiography. So there is clearly a huge generational gap, and what concerns me is that some of us here might be fighting the battles of the past, trying to kill a dead horse many times over. Once a horse is dead, you can't make it more dead. Okay? So you cannot kill it any deader. Okay? So here we are doing deader, deadest. So, but the thing is, there are important things relating to the future that we are missing. And we may lose the future if we preoccupy ourselves with the past. And another interesting thing that I noticed with, of course, when I teach at a college, obviously the students, they will be younger than the audience that I get here. But even my lectures, in seminars in which there were some older people, I gave my lecture, for example, in addition to Dartmouth, I spoke at Cambridge, Massachusetts, which is the home of both Harvard and MIT. So we had a large number of scientists, and the Sanskrit department of Harvard, they were there. And then I also met with people, the seat, which is the University of Massachusetts, located in Dartmouth, where the Center for Indic Studies is, and where I was located. And I also spoke in Oklahoma, because I visited my sister and they had arranged a talk for me in one of the centers. And also met with people in Houston. And curiously, those people were, many of them were, had come from Harvard. And I had a meeting with some of the students from Harvard who were there for a meeting. Okay? So I met with a large number of people. And please understand that Boston area in the United States is the intellectual capital of the US, if not the world. Okay? You think about Silicon Valley and all that, which is fine. But I have seen no place in the world in which you have such a concentration of vigorous intellectual activity. And there they take nothing for granted, the institutions. And a basic thing that we notice, I was aware of all these things, but I had taken for granted because I had been away for so long and I went back. It highlighted, it was thrown into contrast. For example, a peculiar difference between Indians and the United States' attitude to expertise is Indians value experts coming from outside the country much more than they value their own experts. Okay, it's a fact of life. Otherwise, a charlatan, a riffraff like Perpola would not be given royal treatment. Okay, and that. I have found all sorts of people, absolute third-rate people here being given royal treatment. I mean, but in the US it's the exact opposite. You may have the most advanced and the biggest reputation and everywhere else, but you have to prove yourself in the US. So they trust their own experts. They don't much more than a foreign expert. Let me give you a very concrete example. Here, for example, a fellow of the Royal College of Surgeons, FRCS, England, especially London, not Edinburgh, was the top of the world. He's a surgeon. But US Medical Association does not recognize FRCS degree. They have to go through the board examination and all that kind of thing. They have to go through the surgery board, or if you're a cardiologist, MRCP means nothing. You have to go through the cardiology board or physicians, general medicine board and all that. So as far as they're concerned, you must prove yourself there. And curiously, they're open. Once you have proved yourself, there is an element of objectivity. You see, all this I had taken for granted because I had spent 23 years in the US, first as a student and then as a faculty member and industrial researcher. But now it struck me in a totally different field, because there I came through the ranks. And that was the first thing I noticed when I went to the US, although I was not conscious of it or mature enough to think about it. You see, here I came from a somewhat privileged background, as I got some good treatment because I was Navaratna S Rajaramon's grandson and all that kind of thing. But when I went there as a student, they gave me a calculus course to teach. And I was judged purely by how I did. Nobody cared if I was Navaratna S Rajaramon's grandson. So that is something so the grading and all that kind, none of that mattered anything at all. So you were, regardless, that is going to be there. Mhm. And I think so. So that is something we should recognize that. And second, people have no respect, including students, for reputations and position. Everybody has to face the same tough questions and all that. So, they will not be disrespectful or rude or anything, but the fact of by any means. But that's one thing I noticed. There is I had noticed before also, but I had taken it for granted. Okay? So, essentially, the audiences are younger, the participation is younger, and please, we must recognize that there is not that much difference between Indians and Americans there. I'm talking about the younger generation now in their 20s and 30s and all that. So you must take your message to them in a language they understand. I believe the same thing is true increasingly of the youth here. Okay? They are not going to take things on faith. Okay, that is something I find that a very healthy development. Okay, but we must somehow make our tradition relevant to the youth. That is happening in the US. It's not happening. I think there is still a holdover from the colonial era. That is a problem. I think there is too much respect for the past, not the remote past, but the past 100 years. Okay, which was some of the worst period intellectually from Indian history point of view. Mm-hmm. There is too much. I think that is something we need to recognize. And then I feel the situation is very optimistic. I feel very optimistic about it because we are in a transitional period that the well-established Indology and Indic, Sanskrit departments and all that are going into decline. Please understand, I'm talking only about the culture and literature and arts, and to a lesser extent about the science, which I will get to, and not about politics, economics, and all that. That is a different medium altogether. Okay, we should not confuse the two. And another, some of the holdover there is because of the bad decisions taken by some of India's own governments and leaders, regardless of parties. For example, they have sponsored the wrong kind of people. One I can think of is Amartya Sen. He was given $5 million. He's unlikely to do anything new. It's like giving $5 million to, say, someone like M.F. Hussain. Okay? He's not exactly the wave of the future. Even apart from whether you like him or not, that's beside the point. All I'm saying is that money could be better spent. And Ayurveda is becoming quite valuable because of the medical costs. I think a very major problem is the medical health care and all that. And Ayurveda is now on the verge of being recognized as a legitimate alternate medicine system. I don't know the facts because I just know from talking to people because Center for Indic Studies publishes a journal called Light on Ayurveda. Mm-hmm. And I'm planning to start a journal on Vedanta to be called Chandogya, which will be Vedanta and metaphysics. That means Vedanta. So my own feeling is that Vedanta should be brought to the present world. We cannot expect. And also, there is too much religiosity being peddled in the name of spirituality. You are not going to attract young people from that. Okay? They have seen enough religion anyway. I think the older generation of Indians in the US, that is those who came with me there, they're trying to recreate the climate in which they grew up, which was surrounded by, and even that is imaginary. Okay? You see, the temples and all that kind of thing. And most of them do not have the educational, in the sense they're very competent professionals, very good people in their own work. Otherwise, they wouldn't have risen that high. But they do not have a proper understanding of Indian tradition, history, or anything. They go too much by other people's opinions, okay? And sort of a feel-good. There is a conference called World Association for Vedic Studies, WAVES. And that is, again, more a social occasion than an intellectual. On the other hand, we have something called the annual Vedanta Congress, which meets every summer for about 2 or 3 days in Dartmouth. There, we bring people from all over. Next year, I'm going to be organizing it. That is 2011. and have specifically made it focused on Vedanta and modern science, the questions of modern science, fundamental questions. So, in addition to the journal that we are planning, we are looking for sponsorship and all that. I mean, we'll find it. But a great difficulty when I contact people here, institutions, I don't want to name them, is that they command very little credibility. Because ultimately, everyone is going to be judged by the product that you put out. You see, for example, if I say, Vedanta can help us understand the problems of quantum physics or problems, first and foremost, I must know some quantum physics. The idiom and what is the nature of the problems. Simply to speak in very vague terms, I'm quoting this fellow, Oppenheimer said that, Schrödinger said this and all that. It's not going to, initially it will be interesting. I mean, maybe before I leave, I'm leaving again in September to England and then to the States. Maybe I will make a presentation on the true nature of the fundamental nature of the problems that has come out of quantum physics. It came to light only in the 70s, and where some of the same questions at a metaphysical level had been addressed by Vedantic thinkers like Shankara and Madhva, and those that's not relevant here. But what I'm saying is, when you talk in those terms and make it credible, that will attract people. And it's a fact of life that we must accept that some of the finest minds among the young people are attracted to science and technology. That is where they're going, okay? And we must bring them into the fold. Fortunately, they have an interest and they're receptive to ideas. But in our generation, our responsibility is to reach out to them and present it in a manner that they can understand. Coming back to that, the collapse of, I should say, decline of Indology and all that leaves us an opening. And then another thing, what is happening is science is becoming increasingly important in the study of ancient civilization. What we are saying, I think it's, I was one of the first to introduce the climate change and all that. And then, of course, Frawley had laid the groundwork with showing that it's the maritime symbolism in the Vedic studies, in the Rig Veda particularly. Therefore, so there were not people from Central Asia or remote from the oceans, but there were people who are local, I mean, in the sense, who were close to the ocean, and a major part of their activity is oceanic. I think from a history point of view, that is the most significant contribution made by David Frawley. And we have built on it, and later in our book, Hidden Horizons, which has now sold over 30,000 copies. Unfortunately, we gifted it, we didn't copyright it, so we are getting no royalties for it. But anyway, at least people are buying them and reading them. It was brought out by the Swaminarayan Group, and in Ahmedabad and Delhi. That looks at the natural history, genetics perspective much more. And but I would suggest that the greatest interest that is exhibited by the community there is in the potential of Vedanta to understand, or at least to shed light on. We are not going to solve those problems. We should not make those extravagant comments. And in this case, in this instance, I mean, I'm not revealing any secrets, that I have been a strong critic of this movement known as Vedic mathematics. I believe it is neither Vedic nor much mathematics. What you have are a large number of computational tricks which are interesting, but the fact of the matter is that all those problems, it doesn't give us any new mathematical methods. Professor Bhanumurthy, who is a distinguished mathematician, showed that they're mathematically correct. That is fine. I mean, the person who wrote it was himself a capable mathematician. I mean, there can be no two opinions about that. I wrote both in Kannada and English about the problems with that. I will very briefly mention it. All these wonderful tricks were known in the Atharva Veda and all that. what happened to a very large number of mathematicians, going back at least to Aryabhata, if not earlier, to the time of Bhaskaracharya, that is the medieval period, that's 1,000 years. None of them knew about it. Were they all fools? None of them knew about it. And you, don't forget, it was a golden age of mathematics. Until the 15th century, India was ahead of Europe. Calculus was invented here. I mean, in special case. Algebra was invented here. The decimal system and the place value system was invented here. So there were extraordinarily brilliant mathematicians. So something that was discovered by a person in 20th century, supposedly ancient, they cite ancient authorities like Shulba Sutras and all that. None of them knew about it. Was Aryabhata a fool? Was Bhaskaracharya a fool? And Varaha Mihira, these people, these were geniuses. So I think we have to be very careful in making those extravagant claims, because it will come. I mean, it is interesting if you want to use it for pedagogical reasons, to help students, to make them interested, but we should not make those kinds of claims, because it undermines our credibility. It's always better to claim less than claim too much. Okay? Then our criticisms are not taken, okay, seriously. On the other hand, the problems of metaphysics in Vedanta, that are thrown up by what you would call quantum physics, which has come to light especially after the work of David Bohm and John Stuart Bell's, the famous Bell's theorem. You see, here we have a scientific academies and all that in Bangalore, but I have had no discussion of the problem of reality, entanglement, and all this, which are central problems, metaphysical problems of quantum physics. And I'm looking forward to the lecture on Vedanta and science, which will be organized here. And I would like to compliment Gokhale Institute for having the vision to do something like that. And so, in fact, this was the motivation for my going back both to England and to the United States, because I want to get it off the ground and start a new program on a rigorous application of Vedanta to problems of reality and consciousness in quantum physics. It's a fascinating problem that happens to be my current interest. In fact, I'm writing a book on that subject. It was nice to get back to real science. But for that to happen, we must bring Vedanta, or the relevant portion of it, the non-theistic portion. For example, the Brahma Sutra Bhashya of both Madhva and Shankara have very little on the theistic portion. It's about the reality, proof, pramana, and those kinds of things, which are relevant to modern physics and modern science. So we have to bring it in a manner and in a language that is useful to the present. I mean, some people will object. My thinking is that if the ideas are outstanding and profound, it doesn't matter. It should stand the test of time. Whether it is done in the 20th century, whether it was done in the 15th century. Newton's Principia Mathematica was written in the 17th century. It has not lost its relevance. And nobody says you have to learn Latin to read Newton. That is nonsense. So, I mean, everybody is not going to learn Sanskrit. We must make it relevant to our people, our young people. If we cannot address our future generations, then there is no point in our doing anything at all. Okay? I mean, the whole purpose of any intellectual or other enterprise is for the next generation. For future generation. So that is the spirit in which we are organizing the Vedanta Congress, and also hopefully the journal that we plan to start called Chandogya. And there are very good physicists who are going to working on that. And now, you see, for example, Fritjof Capra wrote a book called Tao of Physics. It was well intentioned, but then his knowledge. First one ನೋಡ್ತೀರಾ 10-11. So I will show you a few scenes from the lecture that I gave, because the sound is not there, which is very good. Otherwise, there was a lot of noise. So that will give you an idea. I will comment on it, so I won't take more than 2 or 3 minutes. I think it begins with what, 10.1, that video? Yes, sir. Let us first look at 10.1. Yeah. You see, this was the local organizer of Samskrita Bharati. His name is Giri Bharathan. This is the MIT, one of their auditorium, actually a large classroom. So essentially, I remember the question that came about. He raised a very interesting question. This was an American student of Sanskrit. He said, we know Sanskrit is Samskrita, which was carefully preserved for more than 2,000 years. That's enough. Okay. We will go to the next one in a few minutes. So the question he raised was, you see, Sanskrit is unusual. All of us know that the grammar that was taught in the time of Kalidasa is exactly same as the grammar that is taught today to students. And we use the same grammar. No other language is like that. For example, I was looking at Sri Tattvanidhi by Mummadi Krishnajvaliyar. The Kannada there is quite, this was not 1,000 years ago. This was less than 200 years ago. Mid-18th century, mid-19th century. And I found both the grammar and the spelling in those books is quite different from what we use today. Kannada. And the same is true. Shakespeare's English is quite different from the English of today. But Sanskrit is not like that. 2,000 years and more. Exactly the same grammar. Of course, the styles vary, the tastes vary, but the language has not changed. That is because we have taken special care to preserve it. What he said was that he's a classical scholar. He told me the same is true of Latin and Greek. Like Sanskrit, because he said Latin, like Sanskrit, was preserved for centuries because it was the sacred language of the church. People did not at any time speak Latin the way it is found in Latin literature. Even today, that's true of, and he said the same thing is true of Greek. I know some Latin, but I don't know Greek. You see, for example, at every time, in addition to this being a sacred language, after all in Sanskrit, most of the literature is non-sacred. It is secular literature. In English, you have the King James Bible, but you also have a lot that is not. But you see, it was also a convenient medium of communication for scholars particularly and the elite. And today, most of us who use, many of us who use English in communication don't speak English at home. That was true of many of the writers of Sanskrit language also, in Sanskrit literature also. Many of them did not speak Sanskrit at home. For example, Shankaracharya probably spoke Malayalam. Madhvacharya we know spoke Tulu. And Dandin probably spoke Tamil. So Bhartruhari, for example, this great, who wrote Malati Madhava and Uttaram Bhavabhuti, he probably spoke Maharashtrian Prakrit, or the ancestor of Marathi. So that was common. The very existence of Prakrits in Sanskrit drama shows they spoke other languages at home. So it was the same with Latin, and in the North India and much of Central Asia in the Middle Ages, they used Persian as a common language. So what he told me was the same as true of Latin and Greek. So the idea of the Indo-European from which all these branch doesn't make sense. So it was their artificial languages. Next one, please. 11.1. You see that gray-haired gentleman, he's Michael Witzel. He asked me the same questions. I was a little disappointed. I thought he would get it. And the girl, she's either a German or a Russian sitting next to him. One of his. So you will see quite a few Indians there. Okay, because science and technology there are quite dominant. That is Witzel. The sound is not there. He asked me about the horse evidence, and he was sort of almost shouted down until this thing. You see, that gentleman is a famous Sanskrit scholar. I think that's fine. So essentially, he was, that's fine because the sound is not there. So I have all these, if somebody wants to see them in more detail. And also, this talk which I gave in Cambridge is on YouTube. It was put on YouTube because one or two of the people that Witzel and his students, they tried to distort what I said and said this is what happened and all that. So I said, so the organizers put it on YouTube so that you can verify for yourself what was said. You are not dependent on my version or his version or anything. And anyway, he again brought up the horse evidence. I told him that horses were there, but he said they were different horses. I asked him how he knew the horses were different, because he wasn't there. I mean, but I have to say that I was a bit disappointed, because I had expected he would raise some new questions. He did not. But could you get to the last one? Yeah. The person, he questioned why I was so critical of, he's a Witzel student, another. Those two both are Eastern Europeans, I think either Russian or East German or some such place. He questioned my criticism of linguistics as a science. I told him that both the AIT and OIT, AIT is the Aryan invasion, that the Aryans came from outside. OIT says the Aryans left India and went to Europe and all that. So I told them both of them use the same data, and supposedly that is the Rigveda, Avesta and all that, and supposedly they use the same methodology, which is comparative linguistics, but they come up with exactly opposite conclusions. So one group says, they came from outside, another group says using the same text and all that, they went outside. They left India and went in the opposite direction. And you both claim you are scientific, but you contradict each other. So how can you expect, when you can't agree among yourselves, how do you expect outsiders like us, who are highly skeptical of these subjects, to accept your subject as a science? And you see, that's incidentally Talageri's claim. And if we go a little bit further, and I had a very interesting question, because during this I mentioned that the problems of quantum physics can be, Vedanta can shed light on the fundamental problems of quantum. I think I'm running out of time, but this is okay. I mean, basically, because I want to leave some time for questions. Quantum physics, and this person who is of Indian origin, Surat, but who is a graduate of Harvard and who is at Harvard, his name is Surat, if I remember. He raised some. We had a fairly strong exchange. He said that we should not, people talk about all sorts of nonsense and then they claim it is related to Vedas and Vedantas and all that. I said, fine, but I'm not making any such claims. And we are going to organize a conference summer of 2011. You please come and visit it and present your side also. And we should allow all possible. I mean, to some extent he was justified, because I have seen extravagant claims being made. That Bharadwaja, Vimana Shastra and all this kind of thing, and in relativity, and he was confused between reality and relativity. The two are fundamentally different problems. So coming back to that, I feel that the scene looks exciting in the West. We should have more collaboration, and our universities, particularly academic departments and all that, should find some way of ensuring academic freedom, and otherwise the quality will be what the kind of thing we are getting. Because after 60 years, if people still have to look to people like, if for Parpola to come and pat them on the back and say your culture is wonderful, if somebody told me that, I would feel highly insulted. Who the hell are you to tell me? I mean, do I need this fellow who has just pocketed, 10 lakh rupees from me and then say, oh, you're all very good? I mean, do we need that kind of patronage 60 years later? Don't we have any self-respect? If somebody were to come and tell me, I would, within reasonable limits, slap him. Okay, who the hell are you? That's, would he go to say Cambridge, Massachusetts, go to MIT and say, hey, you guys are all right. You are not fools. I mean, you're doing good work. I mean, he won't come out of it alive. So, in fact, the famous violinist Subramaniam told me that when he had to play with the New York Philharmonic, they gave him a very tough time, because every musician in the New York orchestra thinks that it is the best orchestra in the world, therefore I'm the best musician in the world. So you better prove your this thing. So I feel the greatest, it's all right to be interested in learning our past and all that, but we are not going to, take our younger people back to the days where we were born, or forget about the Vedic times and all that. So please encourage people with a strong scientific background to study with a critical point of view. And once we do that, because it's our claim that our system, there is no dogma in our tradition, in Sanatana Dharma tradition. Vedanta, Veda and all that, it's a Paurusheya, and therefore we don't accept the authority of anyone. Okay? That is the core belief. That is what Gayatri Mantra says also. Dhiyo yona prachodayat. Okay, that we should be true to that. So that means if somebody points out that what this Vedanta says is wrong, we should be willing to listen to that. Because science and Vedanta have a similar thrust, that accept nothing an authority. That's what Buddha also said, and Madhvacharya also said. Never accept any human claim without, because humans are capable of error and deception. Okay? And what gave me the idea of looking at Brahma Sutra in the context of quantum mechanics is when I accidentally opened the Brahma Sutra Bhashya of Madhvacharya, and he said reality is of two orders, dependent and independent. And then in Shankaracharya he comes at it, and Mithyavada and all that, and of course they're mutually opposed, and that's what it should be. Different authorities should give different viewpoints. That is part of our tradition. So in anything I do, please, I do, at least my program is to involve the students and the young people as much as possible, both here and there, and have good contact with the lead centers. And don't sponsor, if these people, they will come, more people like Witzel and Parpola will come hat in hand with a begging bowl. Simply because he talks as though he's very big, we should not sponsor them. Let them, as they say, when I went to America, they were very courteous, they gave me full credit for my work, but I had to prove myself. So people coming here must prove themselves. When it comes to the Sanskrit scholarship, this is what I told a few years back in Cambridge University, not Cambridge, Massachusetts, in England. Look, Indians started learning English and European language. It's about the same time that Europeans started learning Sanskrit. Many Indians have attained distinction as English writers, and others have earned distinction as distinguished writers in French and other languages. I mean, we didn't have so much contact with France, so whatever. But there is nothing that a European Sanskritist has written in Sanskrit. Not even one Subhashita that has made it to any anthology. So, you see, but why are these people considered so great? It is because of our own weakness, excessive deference for anything coming from there. Okay? Fortunately, it's not so much in science. And also, we are losing talented young people. Everyone talks about, M.F. Hussain went away and somebody else went away. How about Venkatraman, who left India in the 20s and got the Nobel Prize there? And he went to Ohio University, which was a second-tier university in the state of Ohio. I'm not even talking about a second-tier university in the United States, other than the Ivy League. Incidentally, the real strength of American higher education is not the elite institution, but the general excellence which you can achieve at any university, a decent university. The standards are there. So having said this, so let us strive for excellence, and and we have a golden opportunity now to establish our presence and prove ourselves and our tradition in the world, on the world scene. But for that, we must present our great achievements in a language that is comprehensible to the youth today. Okay? Thank you very much. I'll be happy to answer any questions. Yes, sir. Ask me anything either in English, Kannada, or Hindi. Yeah. Yes, sir.
My question is, you are discussing on a topic on Sanskritic studies. My question is actually the influence of English on Indian languages.
Yeah.
And how it is actually rerouting our Indian languages and its contribution in development of the tradition and the culture. And how do you see it in future? Because the generation where I am looking at, the coming generation, they are not studying the Indian languages as we were studying.
Correct.
And we know the roots, but unfortunately they are fully submerged with English.
The thing is, we should take advantage of it. For example, I have not found, no writer in my time, when I was studying, in the 50s and all that, that is when I had time to really read Indian literature and all that. No writer in my time in Kannada had the kind of influence or appeal that S.L. Bhairappa has today. Okay, I know you see an exception. But similarly, you see, I was also told when I was in school and college, we come from a family steeped in Carnatic music, not performing artists, but the great interest in Carnatic music. We were hearing that Carnatic music will disappear, Bharatanatyam will disappear in 10 years and all that. Today, I find 10 times, 100 times the interest there was. And that is the thing that I find. If English helps us advance our culture, for example, if it allows me to blend, incidentally, I'm not opposed to Indian languages. You were writing, for example, I'm writing an article, a weekly column in Samyukta Karnataka on science. I write it in Kannada. Some people said it's being translated. No, I write it myself. Occasionally, I write in English, which are translated into Kannada because my English article gets published somewhere else and goes into Hindi and Marathi and other languages also. That's beside the point. All I'm saying is, we should see this as an opportunity. Recently, I saw a book, which I had read in high school, called Raja Malay Simha by Srinivasacharya. I don't know if you have read the novel. It has just come out. You should get it. It's a beautiful novel, 3 volumes. One of very entertaining. You see, to some extent, I believe we have damaged ourselves by not using public appeal as a measure of something. Okay, I used to make fun of one of my aunts that who was a novelist, Usha Navaratna and but she said, look, nobody forces. She was very popular, as you know. So she said, look, people buy and read my books. So what difference does it make? Nobody. I don't force anybody to buy my book or anything. So they must not forget the public. I find more discussion. Recently somebody was introduced to me as a very famous Sahiti. I had never heard of it. So I think there is too much politicization, cliquishness in Indian literature that so that they don't stand the test of the public. Ultimately, if nobody, I should have the freedom to write whatever I want, but I don't have the authority. I should not have the freedom to force everybody to read what I write. So if it doesn't appeal, then it's my problem. The research program that I'm pursuing to bring together Vedanta and quantum metaphysics, if it fails, it fails. Okay, that's an occupational hazard. So we must take that attitude. I personally feel that, for example, the people who introduced me in Boston, Massachusetts, they spoke Sanskrit. Who could have imagined it? And the Sanskrit professors could not speak Sanskrit there. And so that was what I held up to. He asked me a question, can you ask me that question in Sanskrit? I asked him. No, of course not. So the thing is, we should stop. First step is we should be sure of our own step. Second, we should not defer to other people who come here. Judge them on their merit. That is not happening here. Both among Indians, because we pay too much respect for position and reputation. Okay, that should go. If you offend a few people and occasionally, sometimes it's not possible to be polite. I'm not saying we should be impolite, but at the same time, truth is more important than anything else. So let us maintain standards, lift our standards. Why haven't the intellectuals come out and denounced Karunanidhi and Porpola Circus? Suppose, you remember about 80 years ago when Jha and I came out with our book, there were a full issue of Frontline was devoted to attacking us with no evidence, accusing us of fraud and all that. They're in disgrace now. That's beside the point. But now what is Porpola's argument? You see, the argument still is there were no horses in Harappa, there were asses. Okay? Which is, if you want the Latin name, it is called Equus hemionis. Okay, asses. So I told Witzel that your Aryan invasion theory, now that you acknowledge no Aryans existed, has become the horse invasion theory. With Porpola, it has now become the ass invasion theory, invading asses. Next, we can introduce zebras also. So AIT became HIT, and then again AIT because of the asses, and now we can introduce zebras and ZIT. So why you see, why do we treat this as serious scholarship? Okay. When Benny Hinn came, he got royal treatment. You remember that? He was given the Jakur Stadium, which is a defense facility. So let us put our own house in order. You see, the English, we can use it just as we now use software industry. We didn't invent it, but the fact of the matter is we beat them at their own game. Arun Shauri told me that about this globalization. This will happen, don't worry. He said we are going to be able to compete with them. So I mean, I have gone a bit long-winded, but I think what it is we must see it as an opportunity. If we want to, if English helps us propagate our culture, let us do it. Okay. Thank you very much for a very good question. Yes, sir. Anybody else? Yeah. Hidi.
From what I gather, this methodology of Vedanta is going to be central to your work.
Yeah.
Now we know that there are two streams of works in Vedanta, one the populist and the Shastric. And the Nyaya Shastra works are purely polemical and Shastric.
Yeah.
And we know that in Vedanta and particularly in Nyaya Shastra, highly rigorous tools were involved.
Oh, absolutely.
So, in order to use that methodology, don't you think our traditional scholars, who are the custodians of these tools, rather than universities, they will be useful to you?
Very much so, because I have just, scratched the surface. You see, the thing is, we have ignored these traditional scholars. For example, I went and when I was in Jammu, I spent about 2 hours looking at inscriptions and all that. And I was brought in because I read old scripts, and what struck me was the profound knowledge of Vyakarana, which is also a very rigorous discipline, was helped in reading those inscriptions. Okay, so I think we must. I mean, after all, I worked with a very great traditional scholar, Natwar Jha. I mean, he could never have done what he did. I mean, I couldn't have done it on my own. Okay, the expertise that I supplied could have been supplied by others with a similar background if they had an open mind. Okay, but what he did. And Jha was unusual in that he was not only a traditional scholar, he also had a modern PhD in classics. So I think I am going to bring that up when I go back and say that we must bring some traditional scholars. Even these modern graduates of Sanskrit really don't have that depth. Okay, yeah, because they have studied Western books. They read Keith. They read this thing. MacDonald and those kinds of things. All you have to do is to look at Monier-Williams dictionary and compare it with Optes dictionary, from a practical point of view. I think that's a very good point. We need close cooperation with traditional scholars, and if we have to use English for that, but if it supports more traditional scholarship, all the power to it. I would like them to be, that will also build up our traditional this thing. Not only Nyaya Shastra, Vyakarana, Agamas. Agamas is a little further about, but anyway, yeah. Thank you very much. Anything else, please? ಇಲ್ಲ ಆಯಿತು ಅನಿಸುತ್ತೆ. ಓಕೆ.
ನಮ್ಮ ಮುಂದಿನ ಕಾರ್ಯಕ್ರಮ 12ನೇ ತಾರೀಕು ಸೋಮವಾರ ಅಸಿಸ್ಟೆಂಟ್ ಕಮಿಷನರ್ ಆಫ್ ಇನ್ಕಮ್ ಟ್ಯಾಕ್ಸ್ ಡಾಕ್ಟರ್ ಸಿಬಿಚನ್ ಮ್ಯಾಥ್ಯೂ ಅವರಿಂದ ಉಪನ್ಯಾಸ ಇರುತ್ತೆ. ಲೈಫ್ ಇನ್ ದ ಟ್ಯಾಕ್ಸ್ ವರ್ಲ್ಡ್, ಸೋಮವಾರ 12ನೇ ತಾರೀಕು. ಡಾಕ್ಟರ್ ನವರತ್ನ ರಾಜಾರಾಮ್ ಅವರು ಹಾಗೆ ಪಾಶ್ಚಾತ್ಯ ವಿದ್ಯಾ ಕೇಂದ್ರಗಳಲ್ಲಿ ಈಗಿನ ಸಂಸ್ಕೃತ ಅಧ್ಯಯನದ ಸ್ಥಿತಿ ಇದೆ, ಇದೀಗ ಯಾವ ದಿಕ್ಕಿನಲ್ಲಿ ಬೆಳವಣಿಗೆ ಪ್ರಗತಿ ಇದರ ಪ್ರಯತ್ನಗಳು ಸಾಗ್ತಾ ಇವೆ, ಈಗ ನಾವು ಗುರುತಿಸಬೇಕಾದ ಆದ್ಯತೆಗಳು ಏನು, ಇದನ್ನೆಲ್ಲ ಬಹಳ ಸ್ಪಷ್ಟವಾಗಿ ತಿಳಿಸಿದ್ದಾರೆ. ಅದು ಅವರು ಹೇಳಿದ್ದರಲ್ಲಿ ಅನೇಕ ಮುಖ್ಯವಾದ ಅಂಶಗಳಿವೆ. ಒಂದು ನಾವು ಎಚ್ಚರ ವಹಿಸಬೇಕಾದ ಸಂಗತಿ ಅಂತ ಹೇಳಿದ್ರೆ, ಇವತ್ತು ಅನೇಕ ಜನ ನಮ್ಮವರೇನೇ ಆದ ವಿದ್ವಾಂಸರುಗಳು ಇತರರು ವೇದಾಂತನ, ನಮ್ಮ ಆಯುರ್ವೇದ, ಯೋಗ ಮೊದಲಾದವನ್ನು ಮಾರ್ಕೆಟ್ ಮಾಡುವ ಆತುರದಲ್ಲಿ ಅವುಗಳನ್ನು ಬಹಳ ಕೆಳಮಟ್ಟಕ್ಕೆ ತರ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದಾರೆ ಅಂತ ಅನಿಸುತ್ತೆ. ಇದು ಆಗದೇ ಇರಬೇಕಾದ್ರೆ ಇನ್ನೂ ನಮ್ಮ ವ್ಯಾಸಂಗ ಇದೆಲ್ಲ ಬಹಳ ವಿಗರಸ್ಸಾಗಿ ನಡಿಬೇಕಾಗತ್ತೆ, ಶಾಸ್ತ್ರಾಧಾರಿತವಾಗಿ ನಡಿಬೇಕಾಗತ್ತೆ. ಅದರಿಂದ ಇದು ಜನಗಳ ಮಟ್ಟದಲ್ಲಿ ನಡಿಬೇಕಾದ ಕೆಲಸಗಳು ಕೆಲವಿರಬಹುದು, ಆದರೆ ತುಂಬ ವಿಗರಸ್ಸಾಗಿ ಶಾಸ್ತ್ರ ಪರಿಷ್ಕಾರದ ಆಧಾರದ ಮೇಲೆ ನಡೀಬೇಕಾದ ಕೆಲಸ ಡಾಕ್ಟರ್ ರಾಜಾರಾಮ್ ಅವರು ಸೂಚಿಸಿರುವಂಥದ್ದು. ಅದು ಆಗಲಿ ಅಂತ ನಾವೆಲ್ಲ ಹಾರೈಸೋಣ. ಮತ್ತು ಇದರಲ್ಲಿ ಯಾವುದೇ ಕಾರಣಕ್ಕೂ ನಮ್ಮ ಈ ಶಾಸ್ತ್ರಗಳ ಮತ್ತು ನಮ್ಮ ಪರಂಪರೆಯ ಸತ್ವ ಏನಿದೆ ಅದನ್ನು ನಾವು ದುರ್ಬಲಗೊಳಿಸಿದ್ರೆ ಏನೂ ಉಳಿಯೋದೇ ಇಲ್ಲ. ಆದ್ದರಿಂದ ಅವುಗಳ ಪ್ರತಿಷ್ಠೆ ಏನಿದೆ, ಅದರ ಮಟ್ಟ ಏನಿದೆ, ಅದನ್ನು ಉಳಿಸುವ ಪ್ರಯತ್ನ ಆಗಬೇಕಾಗಿದೆ. ಇವರು ಹೇಳಿದ ವ್ಯವಸ್ಥೆಯಲ್ಲಿ ಅದು ಆಗಲಿ ಅಂತ ಆಯಿಸೋಣ. ಮತ್ತು ಹೀಗೆ ಇದಕ್ಕೆ ಹೆಚ್ಚು ಜನ ಆಕರ್ಷಿತರಾಗಿ ಇದು ಪ್ರವರ್ಧಮಾನವಾಗಲಿ ಅಂತ ಆಶಿಸ್ತಾ, ಡಾಕ್ಟರ್ ನವರತ್ನ ರಾಜಾರಾಮ್ ಅವರ ಪ್ರಯತ್ನಕ್ಕೆ ಯಶಸ್ಸನ್ನು ಹಾರೈಸ್ತಾ, ತಮ್ಮೆಲ್ಲರ ಪರವಾಗಿ, ಗೋಖಲೆ ಸಂಸ್ಥೆಯ ಪರವಾಗಿ ಅವರಿಗೆ ಕೃತಜ್ಞತೆಯನ್ನು ಸಲ್ಲಿಸ್ತೀನಿ.